Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Friday Voice Chat. We are the Men's Human Rights Discord server. We are the semi-official Discord of the Men's Rights subreddit. Special episode today. We are continuing last week's topic about indoctrination of gender studies and toxic feminism within academia. And oh boy, do we have something today. Now, please do follow the text chat portion of the chat. A lot of people think it's just as much the main event, if not even more so the main event than the actual voice chat itself. You're going to see that Men Are Human has posted a link called Z Library Single Sign-On. I'm going to do a screenshot of what that actually takes you to and what you're actually seeing. And it's this. Professing Feminism, Cautionary Tales from Inside the Strange World of Women's Studies. Now, what this is two respected feminist scholars, right? Not MRAs, but two feminists have come out and they're saying, listen, we are very concerned about what is happening within feminism and academia. It has gotten out of control. It is no longer about truth. It is no longer about tolerance, and it is no longer about equality. And we have a lot of screenshots from a lot of examples. You can click that link. It's going to be in the voice chat. It's going to be in the description of the YouTube video to click on that so you can see it. And there is just a lot here to click and to read. But let me just give you, before we really delve into the details, because we could go on for days on some of the material in these things, let's just go over some of this kind of the overarching idea and just kind of my overarching thoughts about what this is. The modern day feminist movement has essentially started its own circle of logic, right, where they use their own theories as evidence for their own theories. They're presenting subjective opinions and their own personal theories as if it's the same scientific fact as something like gravity or the boiling point of water. And feminist theory is presented in a way that can't possibly be anything other than feminist theory. And if you disagree with it, you are inherently objectively wrong because feminist theory is objectively true. And the way they prove that is by using other feminist theory. Here's what I mean. It's basically self-invented circular logic. It has a built-in self-defense factor where a feminist theorist can always defend herself or defend her theory by using part of its own theory. For example, saying, well, the reason why feminist studies or feminist theories are discredited is because of misogyny. And the only reason why you disagree with feminist theory or feminist logic is because you have a subconscious misogyny that you're not aware of. Therefore, if it's about women, your brain can't process it the same way as if it was about a man. Now, you can't possibly disprove that. You can't possibly disprove that I have some subconscious bias that I don't know about that prevents me from seeing it from a rational point of view. So they can always invent their own reasons as to why their own theories are true. And what they do is they start to get they get theories in sociology and social studies and gender studies. And then they cite other feminists who have the same kinds of theories. And so you have two feminists with PhDs in social sciences, both citing each other as evidence. So now they say, look, now you have two independent people with PhDs who both agree on this. Therefore, it must be valid. And because there's really not even remotely a comparable scale of men's studies, the materials in favor of feminism vastly, vastly, vastly outweigh the materials in favor against feminism. Or not even against feminism, but just, challenging the absolute dogmatic approach. And so you get a degree in sociology and you write a thesis that's really nothing more than an opinion. And then for your supports, you're basically citing other theses, which are nothing more than opinions, and then you present it as if it's the same scientific fact as gravity, or the same scientific fact as 2 + 2 = 4. But what it really is a subjective science. It's not objectively true. Feminist theory and patriarchy and male privilege are things that are subjective. They're things that are opinions. MRAs don't really do that as much. I'm not saying we don't have some opinions, and I'm not saying we don't have some subjective and some observational opinions, but we prefer facts whenever possible. For example, it is a fact that men have a lower life expectancy in almost every country. It is a fact that men have higher pension ages by law in many countries. It is a fact that male-only conscription exists in many countries. It is a fact that there are studies, controlled studies, that show that boys get lower grades for the same work when non-educational factors and educational factors are both controlled for. It is a fact that in many states in the US, it is legal and currently practiced and commonly practiced to charge men higher car insurance rates than women, even if they have exactly the same history of accidents or lack thereof. Whereas what feminism does is it takes ideas and concept ideas such as patriarchy or toxic masculinity, which they take it upon themselves to define what masculinity is, and then they say, see, this is what patriarchy is, and if you don't agree, you must be wrong because our theory says so. And our theory has to be true because these 10 other feminists with PhDs, they all agree with us. They all say the same thing. It's kind of a pseudo philosophy. It's kind of like an invented intellectualism that's not really based on anything tangible other than your own subjective opinion. So it's very scary to see how prevalent it is in academia because it is indoctrination. And what it is, this is why in many of my videos I irritate a lot of MRAs by saying there's a lot of good feminists and a lot of well-meaning feminists. What I mean by that, and what I want to remind people of, is the fact that there are a lot of feminists who they are indoctrinated. They're not bad people. They don't hate men. They're just brainwashed. They believe something that isn't true because, hey, this is a university. I'm at a respected university. This is Columbia. This is NYU. This is UCLA. This is Harvard. This is Princeton. This is whatever. This person has a PhD. They seem intelligent. They must know what they're talking about. And so they're indoctrinated and they're brainwashed by it. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. I personally, though, to me, I think if you study mass indoctrinations of cultures that ended in disaster, such as the Cultural Revolution in China with the Red Guards in the 60s, such as the Bolshevik Revolution in the Soviet Union, or what became the Soviet Union in 1917, 1918, too many people have seen through this already. And the one reason why I do not think this more toxic, radical, extreme version of feminism can win is because in countries like South Korea and in the UK, already 2/3 or more of the male population between 18 and 40 are against feminism. So if they were going to reach that breakthrough in momentum, it would have already happened by now. That, I think Ma wants to add a quick note, and then we'll kind of open the floor. But anyway, that is our topic. Do click that link because it's, like Ma said, click anywhere, and it's a gold mine, or rather fool's gold, I should say. It's a fool's gold mine. But anyway, that's our topic, and thank you for being here. Ma, do you have any notes?
You are going to be amazed by some of the stuff in here. Let me show you just one of the things that these gender studies professors are doing in this.
Anna reports hearing strange stories about one of her colleagues. She started to do some really bizarre things in her courses. For instance, she put reserved reading in brown paper bags in the reserve room and instructed the students in that class to not even permit a man to peek at it. Seriously, I have this on good authority. Students in her classes were to keep the material in these bags, and they weren't to let a man look at it, because some of it was really hot stuff, like information about women's bodies that the male medical establishment had tried to keep hidden.
Are there extra Easter egg style bits of the woman's body that the medical establishment likes to keep secret and that just people don't know about? Like, do you have like antenna or wings or something hidden up in there somewhere that you're keeping hidden from us all, and big secret or something? Because this is what that reads to me. It's some really crazy stuff. This is a female professor hiding information because she doesn't think men can handle it, or she doesn't want men to know about it, or something like that, which means it's probably crazy theoretical feminist stuff. This is pretty much typical of the stuff you find in this book. And I'm going to add some more screenshots now. We're going to go into gender relations in the class themselves because they are a war zone. This is stuff you'll find all the way through this book.
You know, it really isn't limited to stuff like gender studies, but you know, anywhere in the academy, which is supposed to be the place to, you know, disseminate and examine and critique knowledge. If you see any extraordinary procedure to, you know, hide, shield, or filter information, you can just assume ill intent. You know, Ma, you had mentioned, you know, it's probably crazy. I would say it's probably not. I would say it's probably strategic under the I guess tactic of using secret knowledge. Okay, throughout human history, you know, secret knowledge has been used to control people who don't have it. You know, to get them to conform to the desires of the people who do, since time out of mind. It works. I mean, my point is, and again, I know I've said this a million times, but they would not be doing any of this if it was not effective. It works. Okay. Us pointing it out demonstrates that you can't fool all the people all the time. But you know, they play the percentages, right? All they want to do is fool enough of the people. So as far as the why of it, that is why they do it. They do it because it works. It's not, you know, it doesn't conform to any reasonable moral standard, but once again, they don't care. Okay. They are not interested in morals. They are interested in winning.
Okay, well, here's the thing. There's, you know, it's the same way with like for me, I'm just going at this from like a social media, mainstream media perspective. This is just where I'm going at this angle from. It does not surprise me that, you know, the mainstream media tries to hide, you know, actual information, you know, doesn't follow that the mainstream media tries to hide, you know, the truth a lot of the times, and it would not surprise me that in academia they wouldn't try to do the same. It wouldn't surprise me because both of them, I think, are working together, and both of them are working hand in hand to make sure that, you know, to make sure that history isn't been taught correctly, to make sure that, you know, everything else isn't being, you know, delivered, to make sure that journalism at this point is only journalism whenever it fits their agenda. And at this given point, it basically is setting, you know, society up for failure by not, you know, teaching proper academia, but at the same time also with the mainstream media not giving proper journalism and reporting. I'm just saying these are definitely two different parallels as to why we're having the issues that we're having. I'm just saying it's an interesting angle to go at.
But Maddie, don't you think that's what they want? I mean, you mentioned that they,
Yep.
you know, what they're doing will degrade social order, but that's the point. Yeah.
It's exactly the point, because that's how you create chaos and madness all throughout the world, and society needs, you know, peace and prosperity now more than ever. But with the gender wars going on all throughout society, you know, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me that men would be upset or angry because the mainstream media is mainly reporting about them, the same way that academia is mainly treating, you know, the women's issues and essentially being very gynocentric with, you know, how they go about education and their gender studies and how they proceed to teach things. No wonder men are angry.
Well, I'm not
And
particularly
if you
angry,
erase the truth, then you get to rewrite it according to your own desires. So if you erase reality, if you erase history, if you erase science, you get to rewrite it how you want it to be.
yeah, it's exactly that. Because
Reminds me a scene off of a scene off of Men in Black where they're basically trying to do their version of like that flashlight sort of thing to like wipe everybody's memory. It kind of reminds me a little bit of that.
a little bit, yeah, but on a little more practical and widespread scale. But let me play the devil's advocate here for just a second. Given that they are trying to, degrade and dismantle the society that we do have, they would ask, what if theirs is better? What if, as you say, Blue, rewriting history and the future, to conform to their wishes. What if theirs is better?
I don't think it's better to have different laws that discriminate on people based on what gender they are. I don't think it's better to inherently treat a criminal worse because of their gender. I don't think it's better to exclude one gender from homeless shelters. I don't think it's better to underfund one gender's health care. I don't think it's better to force one gender to work longer than the other before they can retire. I don't think it's better to ignore domestic violence victims if they happen to be a certain gender. I don't think it's better to happen to ignore rape victims if they have to be of a certain gender. I don't think it's better to charge people more car insurance for their gender. I don't think it's better to draft people because of their gender. So, you might say those are all subjective opinions, but I would think they would hold up in
And
the
no,
court of
I
common
definitely and another thing, and no, I don't think it's better to mutilate one gender's rather than and not the other. Just making an intact of a statement.
I think we're getting very off topic here. We need to get back to this book. So, Nisha, could you read out the next page, please?
I remember the atmosphere then. I remember feeling afraid in the classroom. One time when I was teaching an advanced seminar, the class was totally polarized. Literally. The lesbians sat on one side, the straights on the other. And I was constantly terrified that they would attack each other physically. Hate each other, hate me, that the class would completely break down. In this particular class, the heterosexual women were intimidated. And this was often the case. They would feel intimidated, silenced, and later they would come and cry and tell me that they just couldn't go on this way. Yes, I'm sure they assumed I was heterosexual myself. I don't think I declared myself. I remember really not liking to feel that I had to do that and resisting that.
They're dividing people up even in the classroom. So their warfare tactics between different ideological groups, their identity politics is tearing their own groups apart. It's not sustainable at all. They're going to destroy themselves and going to create a new generation of hyper-conservatives, I think.
about that. What's so scary about that is it's not even a student who was intimidated, which is bad enough, but even a professor feels that they don't have control of their own class. They're afraid of their own class. So how bad does it have to be if the educators are afraid of their own students?
How adequate and how relevant, I guess, are really these classes anymore, just in general, to anybody, whether it be straight or trans?
I don't think it's about how relevant are these classes in terms of getting a career. I think it's relevant in terms of thousands of people are being indoctrinated every single day. And how are these toxic ideas going to affect and hurt society? That's why I think it's relevant to study. Do I think that complete pseudoscience is a relevant skill to have in the world? No, I don't. But it is relevant to pay attention to harmful pseudoscience being indoctrinated on a mass scale. That's concerning.
These people end up in journalism and politics because there really isn't anything else except to be a gender studies professor that will make them money. And also, though I think the main reason they end up there is because these courses are self-admittedly activist courses based on political ideology rather than anything else. Like, these courses are meant to indoctrinate people. That's their entire focus and function, is to indoctrinate people.
Yeah, I'd
Uh,
like to stand corrected. Sorry, I'd like to amend what I just said because Ma's completely right. These courses do lead to a career in journalism and politics, which does have a massive influence on not only how society thinks, but what the law is. So I actually think Ma's 100% right.
Is it like a shortcut or like a fast track to like journalism and politics?
I think it's a fast track sometimes. Yes.
I mean, I wasn't thinking so much.
Not as a good not as like a golden rule, right? Not as a guarantee, but it's a possible stepping stone.
I wasn't thinking so much on the relevance of work when I meant relevance. I just mean like life relevance, or just relevance overall is just like a movement and like to people. I mean, I wasn't in a gender studies class the other day. I was in English class, but it was interesting that we were doing a Women's History Month event, and probably should have checked this a little more. I know J.K. Rowling does not have a good reputation with the LGBT community, but my vice president chose to present her, and the conversation turned to talking about that whole situation, and it led to the entire class talking about feminism and actually how feminism is no longer adequate whatsoever to any of them. Whether it was the girl, the trans woman in the room, or her friend next to her who was a single mother of 2 kids, or the gay guy who was next to them, or the straight guy behind them, or women of any race or sexuality, men of any race or sexuality. Not a single one of them could find any way that current day feminism or the courses, because 2 of them admitted that they took gender studies course and just dropped out of the program because nothing they were being taught really included them or was adequate or relevant to current times.
the students are poor things. I really feel bad for them because they're not being given an education. And you know, once they're in women's studies, it's like the Stepford Wives. Women's studies turns them into ideologically inflamed Stepford Wives. I was always able to recognize them. These kids who come in kind of zombified, who start uttering stock phrases, and you say, well, so-and-so certainly put her boot print on these kids, because it's obvious they're terrified of a thought. Because if they ever had a serious thought, they might start reflecting on this stuff, and they're taught to repeat. That's one of the most damning things in this book that I've found so far. It's astonishing. It really is. It just goes to show that this isn't a classroom; it's a brainwashing factory. It's a factory designed and built to brainwash students. Sorry, Mark, for talking with you.
I feel like it's like the scene off of Major Payne where it's just nothing but like drill sergeants essentially, like just yelling at them in a certain sense, like, do you hear the words that are coming out of my mouth? You men suck, sort of thing.
An ideological boot camp is not a bad analogy. Actually, it's forcing conformity, and it forces absolute adherence and obedience.
So it's kind of like a man. Oh, I found a line. I don't know if you guys are gonna like it though. I think it's like a man hating or a misandry military camp. Like that's what it is. It's like misandry basic training for a lot of these, gender studies.
Of course, it's not. It's dressed up. It's not. They would never admit to being misandrous. It's always dressed up and presented as something legitimate and something good. But when you read between the lines, the implications become clear that it is teaching toxic ideology, and it is teaching ideology that will inherently lead many people to have negative feelings towards masculinity and towards men. And an ideology that will encourage people to accept sexism against men as being some kind of balance, some kind of balancing act, or some kind of corrective action. We have to make a disciplinary action against the wrongdoings of masculinity in the name of equality. And to many people, to many feminists, when they support the misandristic laws and the sexist laws and sexism against men, they've been indoctrinated to think that it's not only okay to do so, but it's wrong not to do so. Because if you're not attacking masculinity or what they perceive the patriarchy to be, you're being complicit in it.
I think that it basically adheres to the kind of, like Blue was saying earlier, the Maoist student uprising was basically a blueprint for this current movement, because it is scarily similar. The students rising up, they're policing each other's speech, attacking their professors, while other professors are egging it on. And this current movement hasn't yet resorted to literal cannibalism, but they have actually done some pretty hardcore metaphorical cannibalism. And it is in that same sort of vein of, you could rile it up into this quite easily. And the thing about the Maoist student uprising is how it ended is all of the students were taken out into fields and shot and then buried in mass graves. That's how it ended. Because once the revolution is over, you do not need revolutionaries. And in fact, revolutionaries are dangerous to you, because the thing about revolutionaries is they like revolutions. And if they don't like you, they will quite happily rise up. What you want is all the people who didn't rise up against you and who didn't rise up against the old guard, and you want them, like you want the silent majority. You don't want the Revolutionary Guard. It's I don't think they seem to realize this, especially these communist students who are very much tied into the gender studies classrooms, because pretty much the whole of gender studies is like rooted in communist theory and stuff like that. And
people don't know that the Soviet Union in the 50s funded and supported and even founded many feminist organizations. And that's not to say that feminism didn't have and doesn't still have valid issues today, but it's that there is a malicious core behind the history of the modern day mainstream politicized feminist movement.
There is actually a Russian I can't remember what he was, but he was like some sort of information officer in the
KGB, ex-KGB.
Yeah, something like that, in the Soviet Union. And he came over to America and started doing lectures on how the Soviet Union had tried
How to Subvert a Nation. It's a very good video. Discussed before. Yeah, How to Subvert a Nation.
Yeah.
It's very good.
Yeah, you should watch it, How to Subvert a Nation. If you could post that in the chat, that'd be good. But basically, he was talking about, this was like 20 years ago, I think. He was talking about how a nation could be subverted. And one of the things he brought up was, apart from setting everyone against each other with identity politics, was their funding of things like this, basically, where they would create toxic ideologies that would then create more toxic ideologies and spiral America into the ground. I don't remember the whole of that particular lecture, but I think he mentioned gender studies in one of them, because he's done several of these. But anyway, would you like to move on to the next quote? I don't know what my voice is like, so I'm wary of reading it out.
I could read it.
Oh, please do. What about Taz?
Okay. You see, what feminist process in the classroom winds up being is a push toward conformism and toward silencing dissent. It's all done under the rubric of being nice and open, and not being an authoritarian, old-fashioned type of teacher. But this winds up being tremendously more coercive, because with authoritarian teachers, you know they're being authoritarian and you can resist. You know who's doing what to you. But this other way is manipulation, which is far worse than straight coercion, because students are being led someplace without any clarity as to who's accountable for what and who's leading them there. And since it's all supposed to be for your own good, you see, there's this terrible paternalism, or should we call it maternalism? It's all for your own good. And I think that's far more dangerous. Well, sorry, that's far more dangerous than a more old-fashioned, straightforward authoritarianism, because it's harder to resist that kind of maternalism than it is the other, and to be clear about what's going on.
And what better way, and honestly, and what better way to like psychologically like make psychologically subdue somebody into submission than to go after, typically, because typically in any biological thing in nature, right, they go after the weakest one, right? Predators go after like the weakest go after the weakest prey. They don't go after the strong ones all that much. It's too much of a challenge for them. So what do they typically do? So typically women typically are physically weaker. So they're just like, physically weaker. I wonder if there's physically weaker. So why don't we use that as some form of like psychological like manipulation or whatever to make them, think and do all of these things and make them treat, the other gender very badly because of that said thing. And I don't think that's right. I think it's wrong. And honestly, I think it's ridiculous. But I'm just saying, like, just think about it. What does typically a predator like to do? They like to go after the weakest ones.
Yeah, it's grooming.
Yeah, it's grooming. And I think that's kind of what it is. It's kind of like a center for that, so that way they can go after them, manipulate them psychologically, mess with them, put them into submission, so that way they can go out and cause, a gender, war all throughout the world. I mean,
Mad raises a really good point, because you see, what they've done, this gender studies, people think that gender studies is confined to the classroom. But actually, these people, like we said, go out to be journalists. They go out to influence the world. They have activist platforms. They have Twitter presences. They take over the domestic violence shelters. They are refuge. They are in government bodies. They are the experts, quote unquote experts, who are in government bodies forming specific little groups that then influence government policy and shoot down egalitarian laws. So they are having a major effect. If it not for gender studies, I think we would be having a much easier time of it. We would have an awful lot easier time. Like, gender studies expats are the people who shot down the equal misandry law. Like, there was in the UK, there was a misandry law, there was a misogyny law proposed. They were like, how dare you, if we have a misandry law, evil men will use it against women to hurt them and stuff like that. And so let's only have a misogyny law. We definitely won't abuse it. Promise, pinky swear. And they succeeded in that. So there's only going to be a misogyny law. These people, they are in talking heads on the news. They are influencing everybody. And I don't think most people even realize it, because they're influencing them through newspapers and things like that, where they might not even use the buzzwords all of the time. It's this trickle down effect. I'm actually working on an essay about this, but you start by taking like people and you divide them up, and then you like link the people you don't like to bad things, the people you do like to good things, and then use academia to spread misinformation by manufacturing it under the guise of it being factual, using peer review of basically they're peer reviewing each other's work. So it's like a circle of friends all agreeing that everything that everyone else in that group of friends is saying is completely and totally true. And they use language like all these buzzwords, they have a purpose. I've said this for a while now, but buzzwords are basically keys. They're not there to define words that, define things that are new that we don't understand. What they're basically there to do is to control language first and foremost, and secondly to act as a limiter on people getting into expert roles, so only their ideology can be the experts. So you've got to learn the language, you've got to be indoctrinated by the brainwashing system in order to learn all of these words, in order to learn how to talk like them. And by the time you've learned how to talk like them, you are one of them. So you can fake it, but if you fake it and then you slip up, they will all turn on you. It's very, very...
Don't care. I will use your own language against you. I have the magical ability to be able to do that.
Well, that is the downside of it. People can use it against you, but basically, they use PhDs as a way of establishing who is on their side and who isn't. So they don't give you a PhD if you're not on their side, and that means that they then get to shut you out, and you aren't an expert.
Well, that's just stupid.
But at the same time, if you write something they really like, they'll give you an honorary PhD. Okay, do you want to read the next screenshot?
Where it says, and the activist issue was right there. The lesbian students wanted to look only at works that were in some way able to help women. That was their idea of what women's writing should be. They had no interest in aesthetic questions and any structural questions. They were not even interested in reading against the grain, let's say, or reading works that we could see were in spite of themselves, subverting the patriarchal discourse. You need to read Freud. You need to read Marx. You need to read Adam Smith. You need to read all of these figures if you're going to develop a feminist critique. And where do you read them? What I hear from the women's studies is a kind of automatic rejection of people who have made enormous, important theoretical contributions because they are patriarchal, or even more simply because they are male. It is utterly knee-jerk. Dead white male kind of thing. Oh my gosh. What? Why did you make me read that?
To disrupt your patriarchal something or other. But
that's gross.
This book is the proof we've always been looking for, that everything we've been saying about gender studies for years is absolutely on the money. Like this is not so much the proof as the confirmation that what we've been saying about them is just dead on. They are a conformist group keen on brainwashing people. They are not Blue called them a science, but they're not a science. They're at best, they're a pseudo sociology or a pseudo philosophy. What they are is basically an activist political group which has managed to integrate itself into academia and has slowly but surely created a position for itself where it dictates policy for other university courses and things like that, and where they dictate how students learn things and so on. Like we were talking about last week, if you go into a maths textbook in university, you will find feminist stuff. If you go into a physics textbook, you'll find feminist stuff. In the maths textbook, they'll use examples from biased feminist statistics for their graphs and things like that. They will slip it in however they can, because it's all about, it's like a virus. It's like a mind virus, basically, and it wants to spread itself. It gets in you and it makes you want to spread it, and then you spread it to other people, and it just spreads and spreads and spreads. And what we are seeing now is the fever breaking, I think. Like, society has been in the fever of this stuff for the last 10 years, and now we're coming out of it, and people are starting to fight back against it. The normal people even are starting to act as white blood cells against it. It's, people are noticing it. And it's very, very, it's very, very difficult not to notice that this stuff is insane. But for the most part, people have just rolled their eyes and carried on with their lives. But the fact that they're taking more and more and more and more power has put people in a position where they're just not willing to stand up. They're not willing to just bear the brunt of this anymore, because it's having a real effect on their lives. They're starting to realize that their brothers are getting absolutely hosed for this stuff, and their sisters are going absolutely insane with it and turning into brainwashed zombies. And it's really, really scary how good this stuff is at brainwashing people and turning them into zombies. And the interesting thing is, a lot of these zombies are actually awake, in the sense that they know it's lies, but they also know what they can get out of it. So they are basically going along with it because power, and they want to be in a leading position when society comes crashing down.
Blue, you were gone for a few minutes. Mom made me read something, and now I have to wash my mouth out or possibly sterilize it, because that was just gross what I just read.
Yeah, man needs an adult.
I'm sitting over here like, that is gross. Why? Yuck. Do you want me to read the part that's in the text chat?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. I also, by the way, had 2 students who were taking a class who came to me complaining that they were being treated unfairly because they were heterosexual women. They and the other heterosexuals had been asked to identify themselves at the beginning, with the suggestion that by the end of the term, if the course were successful, there would be no heterosexuals left. One of them had been asked to do extra papers. I actually went to the ombudsman about this, because a married woman with kids was being asked to do extra work as a kind of punishment because she had been stubborn about her sexual orientation. See, that's messed up. Again, why'd you make me read that?
Because I enjoy torturing you.
Yeah, you enjoy torturing me, apparently.
I enjoy educating you about your cis white male privilege or something.
That is so.
Don't worry, man. You're not the only one. He enjoys torture.
Oh, that is.
Hey, Doug, do you want to read something for me?
Why? So gross.
Yeah, it is insane stuff. I mean, they're treating lesbianism as a political idea. I mean, this is political lesbianism. But you can't just go along and shove your sexuality in somebody else's face. And I say that as a gay guy. Like, it's wrong. You don't use your sexuality as a weapon. You don't use it on other people. It doesn't matter what your sexuality is. Don't use it as a weapon.
They're almost treating it. They're almost treating it as like a sort of religion that you have to follow, and this is the way, and this is what you have to do. And they're like, shoving it down people's throats. And here's the thing, they get mad at, people of faith for, doing that for so long. Well, quit doing it yourself.
It's not a religion. People make this mistake. It's actually tribalism. This is the in-group, out-group effect. In a nutshell, they are creating the lesbian in-group and fighting against the heterosexual group. And this is a subgroup of the larger classroom group. That's more difficult to say, so people just say it's a religion. But religions are many varied, and they don't all go tribalist. I mean, that's kind of a stereotyping, really. I mean, you look at little Quaker groups who don't care what you believe. You look at the Jews not trying to convert people for 3,000 years. You look at, this is a secular political ideology, which
And that's,
is trying to force its identity on people.
And what's kind of messed up is the last part. I'm going to repeat it again. I actually went to the ombudsman about this because a married woman with children, that could be me. I mean, not yet, not with kids part, but that could be me. If I was in a university and I was married and if I was in a university, I'm a married woman, and to a man, to clarify. Like, that could be me in that university, having to do extra work because I happen to be married to a man, because I happen to like the male gender, because I happen to be sexually attracted to the male gender. That could be me right now getting punished because of my sexual orientation.
Yeah,
it's honestly just, I mean, obviously, there are good feminists and some good people that do take gender studies still. I know that sounds crazy, but it's honestly just overall disdain towards anything close to male. When I was talking earlier about this classroom I was in, the two people who had dropped out of the gender studies course at my school was the single mother and the trans woman. Because they got completely, absolutely excluded and just ostracized in their classes.
That's interesting. Can you tell us some of the things they were doing to them?
I didn't get too many details because the main part of the conversation was about the absolute inadequacies of feminism and any things feminism is trying to do. But so the trans woman was talking about how nobody felt comfortable. She actually got insulted a couple times with people trying to call her male or man, or saying she's not real. And she left the program too because to bring back her issue with J.K. Rowling, some people sort of had a similar attitude where they were like, "Oh, we're feminists and we're so great and we're so strong, but you're basically just a man, and you're not real, and you can't be feminist. It's not possible." And the single mother is just being super intense because they're like, "Oh my God, you have kids already, and you consummated with a man." They were being just completely ostracized. One for being biologically male, and the other for just having kids.
I do. Sorry, I was just going to say that I don't think J.K. Rowling's anything like as bad as people say. I mean, she said she'd march in a trans pride parade if she's asked to march for trans rights. She's just got biological ideas of sex and gender, and she doesn't go along with the idea that they're separate things. But I mean, she probably has more of my idea of trans people, in that you should consider them honorary members of the particular gender that they want to be, and treat them the way they want to be treated, as a matter of politeness, rather than making it some sort of gender constructivist thing, which is what the gender studies people want to do. And it all comes down to, if you buy into the ideas of gender constructivism, whether you accept them or attack them under that philosophy, which is why you get TERFs who think that trans women are trying to worm their way into femininity and undermine all of feminist ideology by saying that you can recondition a man into a woman. I'm talking about trans people are actually a major sticking point for feminism, because trans people kind of break feminism in a way, which is why gender constructivism is actually kind of a patch to stop trans people from breaking feminism in a lot of ways. Because if you go to original feminism was all like, yeah, men and women are separate, and then the individual feminist would either say, and women are better, or men and women are separate but equal, depending on the feminist. Nowadays, you have the idea where you're born a physical gender, but the physical gender isn't important. The mental gender is important, and you can train people to be a particular gender, which undermines LGBT rights in a huge way, because if you can train someone to be a particular gender, then you can train somebody to be a particular sexuality as well. So it's very, very dangerous stuff, and it's all very incestuous. And if you accept one part of it, it breaks all the other parts, and it's very, very difficult to rationalize, which is why I don't think they actually try to rationalize it. They more take the stance that they'll latch onto one part when it's useful, and then they'll jump across to another part when it's useful, and so they'll play both sides of the field, and they'll never actually settle on a particular side. They'll just maintain the party lines. So it's gender constructivism when you're talking about trans rights, but if you're not talking about trans rights, they instead jump over to gender binaries, where they are, where women are distinct from men, and men and women are different, very different in their mental thinking and stuff like that. And but they will still apply little bits of it in toxic masculinity, where they say that you can train men to be women. Basically, it's all very messy, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you go to actual science, which says that gender is basically has a mental physical component, where your brain is wired up in a particular way, but society will also teach you and reinforce certain gender principles. So society can teach you to be more like a particular gender stereotype or less like a particular gender stereotype. But Mad, your mic's going wild. But basically, it's it's a bit of learnt gender and a bit of biological gender, and they mix together. So it's basically it's mostly biological, but you learn and reinforce certain things, but you can also break out of certain things. Under feminism, that all goes out the window, and they basically jump back to the old tabula rasa model of mind, which is where you start as a blank slate, which is what tabula rasa literally means, and you then learn all of your gender traits on top of that. But it would take me a couple of hours to explain it properly, but that's the rough sort of thing. Anyway, has anyone got anything to say about that, or should we move on to the next screenshot?
Just really quickly, Ma, you had mentioned earlier, this sort of misconception that they're developing and promoting a religion. And you're right. I mean, what they're attempting to do and the methods they're using, it's it's more akin to the tribal social order that existed before we invented religions, that where the in-group and out-group biases were very powerful, very permanent. And back in those days, they were often enforced by geography. The other tribe was just too far away to, allow it to have any influence on the home tribe. It's a whole lot more difficult to do, in the modern world. But yeah, that's basically the attempt. I mean, the struggle sessions in revolutionary China that you mentioned, um, were specifically for the purpose of excising the attitude of an outgroup. I mean, those people were, they were thrown out of windows. They were, ostracized. They were banished, just because they dared, to mention or suggest, that what's going on might be wrong. And you see the same thing here in this book. The author mentions the boot print of, of indoctrination, and that's what it is, man. I mean, it stays with that person or those people when they leave. They don't stay in school forever. They go out into the world. Even if they become academics themselves, they're the facing front of the academy. And like I said, they do that because it's effective. And as far as, I asked Blue in the beginning, what if what they have in mind is better? It's not. I mean, it's an endpoint. If we reach that tipping point, social order and, conveniences like being able to, live to reproductive age are going to be a distant memory by that time. And their plan is, that by the time we all wake up and start fighting back, it'll be too late. And, there are times when I worry that they might be right. But yeah, but to answer the question, is what they have in mind better? No, it isn't. It's cultural revolutions and struggle sessions and Lysenkoist science and second harvests forever. Okay? Starvation, disease, ignorance, civil uprising, civil unrest, not just for a while and not just in this place or that place, but everywhere all the time.
Yeah, it's worth
That's what
noting
they have
that.
in mind.
Yeah, it's worth noting that Me Too, basically the way they would stand up on platforms and denounce people is basically their idea of justice. Their idea of justice is like courts aren't justice to them. You've probably seen this with rape stats. If a man is let off by a court as not guilty, then he is a rapist who has escaped by their logic. Because a woman accused him, therefore he is guilty. This is very Maoist. And this is very these people are like, it's a toxic form of tribalism. Tribalism can be non-toxic or it can be very toxic. A non-toxic form of tribalism is culture, but a toxic form of tribalism looks like culture, but is in fact a kind of activist kind of revolution within that culture. And this kind of thing happens an awful lot. If you have a tribe, then the younger members of the tribe might rebel against the older members if the tribe gets too big and too complacent, and go off and form their own tribe, or they might kill the tribe and take over. It's very much that sort of thing. I mean,
Do you want me to read the last one that you posted?
Just let me finish this thing here. Basically, I mean, if you look at flags and things like that, these are the colors of tribes. If you look at people's clothing, people wear the clothing of their tribe, even if they don't realize it. If you go to another culture, another country, it used to be much more distinct, but you'd see different clothing. Like you'd go to China or India or Africa, and the clothing would be very, very different. And within that area, you would find clothing that differed very slightly in ways that outsiders wouldn't be able to really distinguish, but which would be very differential between different tribes within that culture. So this is what the dyeing their hair is about. This is what the particular look that gender studies students have. I mean, you all know that look. It's this is all, this is what it's about. And they take a lot of their stuff from like the Marxist ideas of revolution and stuff like that. So they are the Marxist tribe, and they think they're doing something new when in fact they're doing something very, 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 very old, something that predates language, in fact. And you'll see, echoes of this sort of thing if you know to watch for it. When politicians say things like they're going after the women and children, like this is the whole one of Russia's justifications for invading Ukraine, is they're saying that Ukraine is mistreating their women and children. That's a very, very common thing for them to say. But anyway, do you want to read the next one?
Yes. At one point, my colleagues decided they wanted to hire a well-known African-American woman, and I was supposed to do something to make this happen, but I had to wait for the Afro-American department to write me a memo about it. They never got me the memo, and I was blamed for this not working out. I was in effect accused of being a racist.
We've got another one which kind of follows on from that.
Work, and just to be able to have some fun. The program was getting bogged down with the race issue and the sexual preference issue. There was so much argument and so much antagonism and self-interrogation and daily confrontation. It wasn't clear to me what was feminist about any of this. I came to feel that it was just pathology. It was just individual and group pathology. I thought that too much bad behavior, was somehow rationalized in terms of feminism, and that there had to be other categories for me, or I just couldn't go on. One of the things that became boring to me was this inward-looking mentality. People so convinced of their superiority and acting like a club. I never liked the clubby atmosphere. To me, it just didn't belong in a university.
So did you all catch that language there? So the program was becoming bogged down with the race issue. So it was dividing people among race and sexuality, and it was dividing up into these smaller groups. This is why you have feminists saying black lesbian women, like, as if that was a particular demographic rather than a collection of very rough, shaky demographics that aren't really very helpful. And like they're building a tribe around these different things. And then it goes on to talk about the antagonism and self-interrogation and daily confrontation. That's a struggle session. That's what a struggle session is. You have you get up on the stage and you're interrogated about your background, and then you make accusations. So you tell people that how you failed to be a good communist, and then you accuse somebody in the crowd of not being a good communist, and you tattle on them. You tell tales about them. This is how it works in North Korea. This is how when you're in school in North Korea, they will get you up in front of the class, and you've got to tell people how you failed as a communist, and then you'll point somebody out for not being a good revolutionary. And revolutionary being one of their buzzwords. Like, there hasn't been a revolution in North Korea in quite a while, but they still call each other revolutionaries. And it's all part of the particular language. You can go on analyzing the rest of that, but that's basically what you got. Those little clubs, like people so convinced of their superiority and acting like a club. This is what I'm talking about. They're all little tribes. They're all forming their little cliques within the group, and then attacking each other. And then those cliques are dissolving into even smaller cliques until everyone is a clique of them, their own self, and they possibly belong to several other cliques. And the politics become very nasty and backbiting and toxic, and it's the kind of attitude where it's the kind of environment where everyone's backstabbing and so on and so forth. Blue, did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, first of all, what you were talking about, the struggle session, I just posted in the text chat. These were also called denazification rallies, posting exactly what you just said. But the reason why these cliques is happening, it's something I need to make a video about and that I've written an article about. It's called a ponerology, and it's a network or a collaboration of psychopaths. And it's when psychopaths, they recognize each other, and so they agree to cooperate for mutual benefit. But at the core,
Funny.
they don't really like each other. It's about personal money, personal power, personal status. And so they will always be trying to get over the other one. They'll always be trying to stab the other one in the back as soon as they feel an opportunity.
Funny how the relationship with Blue. Funny how the relationship between China and Russia may be the same way coming up pretty soon.
Oh, it's exactly the same way. It's exactly the same. Notice how China's already weighing their options. So that's why you have these sudden civil wars between quote unquote white feminism or black feminism or TERFs or SWERFs or anything else. They each try and claim a little piece of their own pie, and they each try and emerge as the new leader. And so you have these little cliques slowly getting smaller and smaller. And it's interesting to note the difference. I think this speaks something to the difference in the ethical basis and background of the average MRA versus the average feminist. Notice how feminism is now beginning to break down into small, hostile little cliques, whereas the MRM is slowly starting to come together and centralize under unification. Notice that. To me, that's very telling.
Yeah, I do find it interesting. I mean, we do have our little breakaways, but they're quite tiny. We still actually agree with them about everything, basically. It's more just sort of personal drama that gets in our way, and it doesn't really get in our way per se. It's more the sort of, basically, we're more of a family here. Like, we all disagree radically about politics and all sorts of other things. We debates on everything from veganism to ethics to like all sorts of things in here. We've had people fighting pro and anti-abortion. It's but it doesn't actually destroy our movement, because we are a movement first and foremost, and we are everything else second. And
we're genuine. The thing is, our movement is genuine, whereas a lot of the more politically minded feminist groups, for them it's just the game of politics and power, where for us it's genuinely about the issues.
By the way, am I going to get canceled because I said something about China and Russia? I just want to clarify.
Well, you probably won't get cancelled, but I wouldn't actually go to China personally if you said something publicly under your name about China, because they take that kind of personally. Yeah.
Oh, too late.
You're probably canceled there already.
Well, you know what? You know what, China? I don't care.
Well, anyway, let's move on here. Do we want to do another screenshot, or do we want to talk about the screenshots we've had so far?
I wanted to make a comment about hiring someone because they're an African American woman. There's blame on the organizations doing this, but there are people involved that clearly know it's wrong that don't do anything about that. Like, there should be pressure on them to actually go and report these things. They're the ones that are involved in those decision-making processes that will never become public for other people to complain about. The people that didn't get that job because they didn't fit that demographic, they'll never be able to know. There's nothing they can do to find that out. So, like, there's a lot of anti-discrimination law in the US, and courts have overwhelmingly said that that applies to the decision-making process, not just to what you produce or the outcomes. But there's no accountability for it when the people that are making those decisions don't share them and are complicit in these violations. So, like, I see that,
That's
and I'm like, well, if you didn't go and write a complaint, you're part of the problem.
the thing is, it's interesting though. You mentioned that's true for the United States, but in some countries, like for example in Canada, you would know that you were denied that job because, let's just say, you're a male or you're a white male, because it's actually codified under law. In Canada, it is the law that for federal employment, there is a hierarchy of hiring based on factors such as race and gender. Where if you have a man and woman of identical race and identical qualifications applying for the same federal job, it has to go to a woman first. I think Germany and Austria have similar laws as well, where if a male and female candidate, I'm not sure if this applies in every case, but if a male and female candidate are otherwise equal, the job should go to the woman first. Even though in all three countries I listed over the last 20 years, predominantly the male unemployment gap has been higher. So the gender, most likely at any given time, more likely to be unemployed, faces a greater barrier to the workplace.
Yeah, I
And
think this. Sorry, go on.
never mind. I forgot.
That was quick. Anyway, I was just going to say, do you want to read the next one? Because I think it's the most
Okay.
damning one of all.
Okay. By the time the 80s came around, it just didn't seem that there was much new being developed within the program. And some of the really exciting developments in the country and in the world weren't finding their way into the program. And they were evolved a kind of language, which was almost like a committee speak of how each course was described, and they all started to sound the same. Issues to be addressed will include, and then the following: pornography, rape, abortion, those things. I think that there is a leveling there for want of a better term that I found boring. It was not challenging. She believes the insularity of women's issues was in large part responsible for the paucity of students in entering the program. What does that mean? What does paucity mean?
Paucity.
Paucity, what is that?
I think it means stagnation.
Stagnation? Okay,
Shortage.
Shortage.
Yeah.
Smaller insufficient quantities or amounts.
Yeah. A paucity of students entering the program, a shortage of students entering the program. That they weren't doing that anymore for the reasons that she's describing here. That
I'm going to say it's good.
Well, that was a while ago, though. This was before the big spike in all of this stuff that this book was released. The book was updated in 2003, but this story probably dates to 1994 because this book is quite old. And I'm revealing this on this particular screenshot because of the point about the 80s. There's been no revolution in this field since the 80s. It's since before the 80s, so like the 70s, 60s was when this field was actually relevant.
There needs to be a new revolution. There needs to be a new revolution, but the new revolution needs to include women being accountable, and women actually having a true sense of freedom, which means you have to be accountable and responsible for your own actions.
Well, enter male studies. Male studies is like gender studies, like women studies, in the topics it covers, but it is not interested at all in all this insanity. It's more of a just a straight segue from social studies, which is being used as a way to counter the insanity. So it's basically anti-insanity, and it's small. I think it's rising in scope a little bit. We've got the New Male Studies Journal, which has come out, and I think that we are slowly gaining ground against this. We had a while ago a university added a section to their library on male studies. It's I think it's getting slowly better. I think we're seeing the fight back, the pushback here. We're the gender studies movement, because I'm not going to call it an academic discipline because it is a movement. The gender studies movement has revealed itself to be a hollow tribalistic farce, and it has done so quite nakedly and quite publicly. And I do mean that quite literally, because one of their favorite things is to go out into public, strip off all their clothes, line up in a sort of a grid formation, and scream at the sky. So, you know, that's one of their little protests they like to do. If you look at it's not Facebook groups and things like that that are doing that. That's gender studies programs that are doing that sort of thing. They get extra credit for activism. They get extra credit for going on Wikipedia and pushing their narrative. It's like they have annual events where they'll go on Wikipedia and do that. Like every year, every gender studies program like gets all of their students to go on Wikipedia and try and feminist it up, which is to say apply their bias to it, which is against Wikipedia's terms of service. Wikipedia ignores this though, because a lot of the admins are actually feminists. So they've infiltrated Wikipedia, they've infiltrated the CDC, they've infiltrated every refuge, every organization of note has a feminist presence in it, and yet they like to say that women are systemically disadvantaged, women have no power, and women have no influence. And yet many of the things they actually complain about are things that prior generations of feminists have instituted. It's quite bonkers, really. Like,
Do you think from a psychological standpoint that maybe because of the bad experiences that women had from previous generations, that's why they're teaching this stuff, because maybe they haven't had, either proper therapy, or they haven't had, they haven't dealt with, their own sense of like trauma or whatever from the previous generations that, of history that has, definitely have harmed, women over time. Do you think that could be it? Do you think it'd be some sort of like projection, and maybe that's why they're doing it, because they're hurt in some way, and maybe that's what's causing this, divide? And
I think it's a range of different things, and that certainly plays into it. There are certainly women who, at least, they've suffered some quite horrible abuse growing up, and in their adult life that's continued because they've never gotten therapy to try and cope with it. Andrea Dworkin springs to mind. But then you've also got people like Sally Miller Gerhardt, who seem to be outright psychopaths, who see men as a class of people who should be exterminated down to about 10% of the population in order to control them, because she sees them as dangerous and she sees them as a threat to female power. But there is a large chunk of this stuff is very, very mentally unstable, possibly abused women who are then taking the personal is political to stance and using their own abuse and saying, okay, every woman is abused like this. But I don't think that's necessarily the majority, because you've got people like Mary Koss, who will hear from women that they are not abused, and instead of going, okay, I'm going to put this information out there, instead of being honest, they will take the information and they will chuck it in a bin, and they will say, no, actually, we're not going to do that survey on people, on after the questionnaire anymore. We're just going to ask the questions which are carefully constructed, be as leading as possible towards the results that we want to get. So, in short, they know they're wrong, and they get power from being wrong, and they get money from being wrong, and they get prestige from being wrong. And so they are quite keen on pushing this narrative that they know is wrong, because they know that it twings the male urge to care for women, and it twings something in women as well, their anxiety, wanting to be safe and things like that, and also to care for women as well, because women have an in-group bias and men have an out-group bias towards women. This is well proven. We have many studies on the website showing this. And yeah, it's basically they are using this particular psychological trick to gain power and influence. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, the shelter movement has been incredibly profitable for feminism, because using female victims to gain money is very, very easy. All you have to do is basically emotionally blackmail rich people into giving you money. So you go to them and say, oh, the shelters are going to shut down. The shelters are going to shut down. This is why feminists like, I can't remember her name. That's nasty UK politician. What's her name? It's not Julie Bindel. It's the other one. Julie Bindel's a Guardian columnist who likes
Do
this
you
kind of
think it's
manifesting.
what about Rebecca Breed?
I don't know her. I don't think that's her.
Well, she back in
I think it's
2016.
I think
Well, Rebecca Reed basically
I think
made
it's
a
Jess
comment.
Phillips.
You're gonna have to go one at a time there. I can't hear you.
You two, you first, Blue.
Sorry, Ma. It's Jess Phillips. It's Jess Phillips is the feminist MP you're talking about.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Sorry. Yeah, so it's people like Jess Phillips can go on the TV and say that the women's movement was all like, having jumble sales for, women, and men need to have their own jumble sales if they want to have shelters. When in actual fact, the shelters weren't started by the brand of feminism that's around now. It was actually Erin Pizzey and her group of people who started them, and they had rich donors, so they could go to people who had money, like usually men, and the men would give them money. And I know this because she says when she tried to get money for a men's shelter, none of the men were interested in funding a men's shelter, because they had an out-group bias towards women, but they did not have an in-group bias towards men. And basically, it's the old strength versus fragility, weakness, vulnerability paradox, where people think that men are strong and therefore they are independent and they can take care of themselves, whereas women are weak and they are therefore vulnerable and they can't take care of themselves, and therefore we have a lot more empathy towards women, especially since they produce babies. But it's basically created a situation where people think that men have everything. This is what feminists preach, that men have everything and that women have nothing. That women are an underclass of maids, and how, what's that thing from that book? It's not housemaids. What are they called? They're called maids or something. I can't remember. Handmaidens. That was it. They think they're the handmaidens, which is why you'll see them dressed up around Parliament as handmaidens, because some law that doesn't really even mildly, um, mildly affect them, it might, it might be an equal law or something like that, and they're out there like handmaidens saying, "Oh, you're going to put us in chains. You're going to put us in chains," and they're using their vulnerability as a kind of battle axe against the government, and they're using it to basically emotionally threaten people into doing what they want. And that's why they're so powerful. It's because everyone has sympathy and empathy for women that they can say that nobody has sympathy and empathy for women, and it's just you, and you've got to help us, please. Oh, please think of the women. Anyway, I'll pass you on to Mad and Blue, who wanted to say.
I just want to say something in my own life, and basically, I've been, throughout this group, and I've gotten to, and throughout my basically entire life. I mean, the only threat to female power or whatever is your own self, and like the threat to female power is other forms of female power, whether it could be vicious, whether it could be, I mean, the only threat to female power is your own self. You threaten your own form of power. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, I mean the UK government, when they were last looking at that new domestic violence bill, it was women who blocked the men's domestic violence charities from participating. And we don't want to stop female power, really. What we want to do is to make it so that everything's balanced out. So if women have power, then men get power too. And if men get power, then women get power too. So everything's nice and equal, and everyone gets a fair share, and nobody, is under, which is what the feminists say they want when they talk about equity, but they don't actually mean that at all. When they talk about equity, what they really mean is vengeance, because when they talk about social justice, what they mean is the kind of justice you get with a mob. Anyway, what about Taz? Did you want to say something there?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I thought you wanted to say something because you unmuted yourself.
Oh, yeah. I was just thinking while I was listening to everybody, especially Maddie, that too many women in our culture, anyway, have run into this frustration where they start to realize, the most frustrating and coercive power out there is the power, enacted on them by powerful women. And, that's true, because they don't account for it. They are not acting responsibly with it. And I still take it back to that same thing. That's by design. That's not an accident, and it's not incompetence. It's being done on purpose. It's for a reason. That's
And
why I keep kind of going back again and again to this idea that, but I don't want to question just their behavior and just their current day tactics. I want again and again to put in their faces, look, this is what you're going to end up with. Here are the consequences in the future of your current actions. And because you are only human, there's nothing you can do about it. This will happen. And if you don't stop now, and it might already be too late, but if you don't stop now, there is no way to prevent it. There is no way to prevent Lysenkoism and struggle sessions and cultural revolutions and vanguards and red guards and little red books, because that's what you're doing. And when you're hungry and cold and exposed to the elements and nobody cares about you, it will be too late. That you won't be able to account for it at that time, but you can still do it now. Like I said, that's, we're looking for answers here. I think that's at least part of it, is to make clear that any of these things, any of these praxis have consequences. They're a means to an end, yes. And, frankly, I understand a lot of desire to change the way things are, but it's like anything else. There's a right way and a wrong way to do it. There's a correct and effective way to make changes so that things are better for everyone. There are also ways to tear everything down without ever being able to replace it with anything. I'm a believer in human nature, and that which, humans don't reach for and strive for consciously, human nature will impose an alternative, and that alternative is never good. It's never something that people want, okay? But it will happen. So like I said, I think that needs to be the push, to be able to say openly to people, look, you are doing what you're doing and it is working, but here is where it will take you. And there is, when I explain that to somebody who is committed that way, they never have a response for that. The best they can do is to come up with this, oh, well, because of the underlying goodness of human nature, it'll all work itself out. And I said, you're just telling me how little you know about human nature. That was all I had to say.
Yeah, this is the Marxist mistake, or one of their mistakes. The other one being following a guy who could only get by asking people for money. But this is a mistake. They think that if they destroy society, they can remake it in their image. And they can, this is why they want to tear down everything. They want to tear down all the political parties. They want to tear down society. They want to tear down education. They want to tear down religion. They want to tear down everything. And then they think that once they have all that nice rubble, they can then be free to build freely what they think is a utopia. But it's not going to work, because humans, as they found in the Soviet Union and China and so on, humans aren't just blank slates that you can shove ideas into and pre-program them as to be robots and build a society like that. You can't really change overall human nature. You can't stop them wanting food. You can't stop them having 3 thoughts and things like that. And that's why the Soviet Union really collapsed. That and gross mismanagement. But
Thanks everyone for coming to the Friday chat at the Men's Human Rights server. We're here every Friday, 4 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. It's been an amazing talk as always, and we will see you next week.
And do check the description. Page and I hope you guys can click and read the stuff yourself. It really works for me.